Widow inherits old house from her father, but what she finds in the backyard changes her entire life. Rebecca held the inheritance papers with trembling hands as she looked at the abandoned property she hadn't seen in 15 years. A widow for 2 months, with 3 small children and no money for next month's rent, that crumbling house was her last hope of having a roof to put over the heads of Daniel, Emily and Nathan. It was when she began digging the backyard in search of a place to plant a small vegetable garden that her life took a completely unexpected turn. What she found buried there would change not only her desperate financial situation, but would reveal family secrets that explained why her father had always been so reserved about that property. Rebecca woke up that Saturday in July with her stomach tight with anxiety. Today was the day to see the inheritance her father had left in the town of Rockville, in the interior of West Virginia. William had refused to talk about the property his entire life, always changing the subject when she asked about the town where he was born. "Mom, are we really going to live in that ugly place?" asked Emily, her 8-year-old daughter, while packing her worn-out doll in a cardboard box. "It's just for a little while, sweetie. Until we get organized," replied Rebecca, trying to sound more confident than she really was. Daniel, 13, remained silent, packing the family's few belongings. Since his father had passed, he had taken on a demeanor too serious for his age. Nathan, the 6-year-old youngest, was still sleeping on the sofa, borrowed from the neighbors. The bus rattled for 4 hours along dirt roads until they reached Rockville. It was a small town of just over 3,000 inhabitants, where everyone knew each other and outsiders were noticed immediately. Rebecca got off the bus carrying Nathan in her arms, followed by her other 2 children, each with their bundle of clothes. "Are you William's daughter from the Mountain Ridge property?" asked the bus driver, a man of about 60 with a grey mustache. "Yes, I'm Rebecca. Did you know my father?" The man exchanged a strange look with another passenger before answering, "Yes, I did. I'm sorry for your loss. But are you sure you want to settle here?" "Why do you ask that?" "Oh, it's nothing. It's just that folks are kind of wary of that property. Your father was very private. You know how it is." Rebecca didn't fully understand what the man meant, but she thanked him for his concern and continued with her children down the main street toward the property. People stopped to look as they passed, whispering among themselves. The house was about 2 kilometers from the town center, on a dirt road that went up a small hill. When they finally reached the place, Rebecca felt her heart tighten. The wooden structure was in terrible condition, with several loose boards, a partially collapsed roof and weeds growing everywhere. "Mom, can't we go back?" whimpered Emily, clinging to her mother's skirt. "We have nowhere to go back to, my dear," Rebecca said softly, more to herself than to the child. Daniel approached the front door and tried to open it, but the wood was swollen from the humidity and he had to force it quite a bit. The smell of mold and abandonment hit them as soon as they entered. The house had 4 small rooms, a living room, 2 tiny bedrooms, and a kitchen with a rusty wood-burning stove. There was no electricity or running water. A hand pump in the backyard indicated there was a well there. "At least there's water," murmured Rebecca, trying to see the positive side. While the children explored the house, she went to the backyard to check if the pump worked. The lot was larger than she had imagined, with several old fruit trees and a considerable space that could be used for planting food. It was while testing the pump that she noticed something strange. The soil around it seemed to have been disturbed not too long ago. There were small mounds of dirt here and there, as if someone had dug several holes and then covered them up again. "How odd," she thought aloud. "Mom, I found a letter," shouted Daniel from inside the house. Rebecca ran to see. The boy had found a yellowed envelope under a loose floorboard in the largest bedroom. The letter was addressed to a certain Jennifer Anderson, a name Rebecca did not recognize. The handwriting was her father's, but the content left her even more confused. "My dear Jennifer, I hope this letter finds you well. I need you to know that I am keeping everything as we agreed. The secret will remain safe with me until the right time comes. I know it is painful, but it is necessary. One day you will understand why I had to act this way. With affection, William." "Who is Jennifer, Mum?" asked Daniel. "I don't know, son. I've never heard my father mention that name." That night, the family slept on the floor on some old blankets they found in a trunk. Rebecca lay awake for hours, thinking about the letter and the strange holes in the yard. What was her father hiding in that place? On Sunday morning, Rebecca woke up determined to clean up the property and try to make it a minimally decent home for her children. She grabbed an old hoe she found in a shed out back and started weeding the yard, deciding where she would make a small vegetable garden. It was while digging near the fruit trees that her hoe hit something hard. At first she thought it was a rock, but when she cleared away more dirt, she realized it was something different. It seemed like metal. "Daniel, come help me here." The boy ran to help his mother dig. Within a few minutes, they managed to pull out a small rusty metal box about the size of a shoebox. "What do you think is inside?" asked Emily, who had approached along with Nathan. Rebecca tried to open it, but the box was locked. She looked for a screwdriver in the shed and managed to force it open. Inside were several old coins, some black and white photographs, and more letters. The coins looked very old, from eras Rebecca couldn't identify. The photographs showed groups of people in front of what appeared to be the same property, but decades ago, when it was still in good condition. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "Mom, look at this photo," said Daniel, pointing to an image where a man who appeared to be a young William was standing next to a blonde woman. "Could this be that Jennifer?" murmured Rebecca. One of the letters in the box was addressed precisely to Jennifer Anderson, but this one seemed more recent. "Jennifer, the excavations have revealed much more than we imagined. I have found evidence that this site has priceless historical value, but I have also discovered why they want this land so badly. They don't yet know what really exists here. I need to protect all of this until you return. William." "Excavations?" Rebecca wondered. "What excavations?" While trying to decipher the mystery of the letters, she heard the sound of a car approaching. Through the window, she saw a well-dressed man getting out of a black car and walking toward the house. "Good morning. You must be Rebecca, Carlos's daughter." "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" "My name is Richard Thompson. I was, let's say, a business partner of your father's. I've come to talk about the property." Something about the man's manner made Rebecca uncomfortable. He was looking at the yard with an interest that went beyond simple courtesy. "What kind of business? Your father didn't tell you anything?" "Well, he owed me a considerable sum of money. I have the documents here that prove the debt." Richard took a folder from the car and showed several papers with William's signature. "According to these contracts, if he failed to pay off the debt, the property would be transferred to me as collateral." "This can't be right," said Rebecca, feeling the ground disappear beneath her feet. "I received the deed through legal inheritance. You can keep the house, but I need you to release the land for some research that was being conducted. It's a matter of honoring the commitments made by your father." "What kind of research?" "Nothing that will bother you. Just some archaeological excavations." Your father had agreed to cooperate. Rebecca realized Richard was lying. The letters she had found suggested exactly the opposite, that her father was protecting the land from something. "I need time to review these documents with a lawyer." Of course, but don't take too long. We have deadlines to meet." After the man left, Rebecca grew even more intrigued. She decided to continue digging in the yard, this time systematically searching for other boxes or buried objects. It didn't take long to find more things. In an area near the back of the property, her hoe hit something that sounded like ceramic. Digging more carefully, she discovered fragments of pots and utensils that looked very old. "Mum, this looks like Native American stuff," said Daniel, examining a piece of decorated pottery. "It might be, son, it might be." At that moment, Rebecca began to understand why Richard Thompson was so interested in the land. It wasn't just archaeological interest. There was something valuable buried there. Over the next few days, Rebecca split her time between trying to make the house livable and investigating the mysteries of the yard. She discovered that the well pump actually worked and managed to set up a basic electrical system with a generator she found in the shed. The nearest neighbors were cordial, but Rebecca sensed a certain reserve in their manner. Mrs. Dorothy, a lady of about 70 who lived about 500 yards away, was the first to truly approach. "Dear, are you sure you want to stay around here?" she asked, bringing a pot of beans for the family. "Why does everyone ask that? What's wrong with this property?" "Your father. He was a good man, don't get me wrong. But he was involved in things that made a lot of people around here nervous." "What kind of things?" "He was digging all over the property, saying he was looking for, I don't really know what. And strange people would show up here from time to time, outsiders, with expensive cars. Do you know who this Jennifer was?" Mrs. Dorothy made a surprised expression. "Jennifer? I haven't heard that name in years. She was a girl who lived here when we were young. Very studious, always messing with old books and papers. She moved away about 20 years ago, more or less." "Did she and my father have some relationship?" "Well, they were very close friends. More than friends, if you know what I mean. But something happened that made her leave suddenly. Your father was never the same after that." That conversation made Rebecca even more curious about her father's past. She decided she needed to find this Jennifer to understand the whole situation. Meanwhile, she continued excavating the yard more systematically. What she discovered in the following days left her amazed. Besides the old coins and pottery fragments, she found buried stone structures that seemed to be part of some kind of very old construction. "Daniel, you need to see this," she called her son one afternoon. In an area near the main house, she had discovered what looked like part of a wall made of stones arranged in a very organized way. It wasn't a natural formation. Someone had built that a long time ago. "This looks like an old house, Mom." "Very old." "That's what I'm thinking too." That night, Rebecca decided to look for more information in town. She took the children and went to the public library, a small but well-organized building on the central square. "Good evening. Can I help you with something?" asked the librarian, a woman around 40. "I'm looking for information about the history of the region, mainly about the area where the Mountain Ridge property is located." "Oh, you're Mr. Williams' daughter? I'm sorry for your loss. He was always here researching the same subject." "The same subject?" "About the region's first inhabitants. He was fascinated by local history. He said Rockville had very important secrets hidden." The librarian showed Rebecca some books about the town's history. In one of them, she discovered something surprising. The area where her property was located had been inhabited by indigenous peoples long before the Portuguese arrived. Later, it was the site of a small colonial settlement that mysteriously disappeared in the 18th century. "The settlement simply vanished from the map," explained the librarian. "There are no records of what happened to the residents. One theory is that they were attacked by bandeirantes, but some historians believe there may have been an epidemic. And the ruins? Is anything left?" "Officially, no, but there have always been rumors that there are traces buried around there. Your father was very interested in that." Rebecca spent hours reading about local history. She discovered that the colonial settlement was called Hope Settlement, and that it had been known for its prosperity, especially from mining and agriculture. Historical records also mentioned that the residents had hidden their treasures before the disappearance. "Treasures," murmured Rebecca. "That's why Richard Thompson wants the land so badly." When she returned home that night, she found an unpleasant surprise. The front door was broken and the house had been ransacked. "Daniel! Emily! Nathan!" she shouted desperately. "Mom!" The children came out from behind the house, where they had hidden when they saw strange men approaching. "What happened?" "3 men came," said Daniel, breathless. "They entered the house and started going through everything. They asked where Grandpa's papers were." "What papers?" "I don't know. When they saw we were hiding in the backyard, one of them said to another, 'She must have hidden everything before coming back.'" Rebecca realized the situation was becoming dangerous. Someone really believed she had information about something valuable hidden on the property. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what to do. She didn't have the money to leave, but she also couldn't expose the children to danger. The next morning she decided to seek help. She went to the town sheriff's office, a small building that also housed the notary public and other public services. "Sheriff Harrison? I need to report a break-in at my property." The sheriff, a man around 50 with a tired look, listened to Rebecca's story carefully. "Mrs. Rebecca, I'll be frank with you. Your father got himself into a complicated situation before he passed away. There were people very interested in that property, and not all of them with good intentions. Do you know what it's about?" "Officially, I can't say anything, but my advice is that you be very careful, and if you find anything of value out there, don't tell anyone until you're sure who you can trust." That advice left Rebecca even more worried, but also more determined to discover the truth. If there really was something valuable on the property, it could solve all the family's financial problems. During the following days, she continued digging, but now with much more care and always checking to see if anyone was watching. The discoveries kept coming. More pottery fragments, some coins from different periods, and even remains of what appeared to be very old metal utensils. But the most important discovery happened on a Thursday afternoon. Digging in an area near the fruit trees, Rebecca found something that completely changed her understanding of the property. It was a larger box, made of wood lined with metal, very well preserved despite being buried. Inside were documents carefully wrapped in waterproof cloth, hand-drawn maps, and more photographs. One of the documents was a more recent letter from Jennifer to William. "My dear William, the research has confirmed our suspicions. The archaeological site on your property is of national historical importance. I have contacts at the National Historical Heritage Institute who can help protect the area. But we need more solid evidence before making the official report. Those interested in exploiting the site commercially cannot discover what we have before we secure legal protection. I'll be back next week so we can organize everything. With love, Jennifer." The letter was dated 3 months ago. 3 months ago, thought Rebecca, shortly before my father left. Looking at the maps found in the box, Rebecca realized they showed not only her property, but the entire surrounding region, with markings that seemed to indicate other archaeological sites. One of the maps had a note in William's handwriting: "Hope Settlement, main structures located, preserve at all costs." At that moment, Rebecca understood the situation completely. Her property was built on the ruins of the old Hope Settlement, an archaeological site of priceless historical value. And her father had dedicated the last years of his life to protecting this heritage from people who wanted to exploit it commercially. But now she was alone in this mission, not knowing who to trust, and with 3 children to protect. That's when she decided to look for this Jennifer. Among the documents found was an address in Charlotte and a phone number. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. On Saturday morning, Rebecca left the children with Mrs. Dorothy and went to town to make the call. Her heart was pounding as she dialed the number. "Hello? Jennifer? My name is Rebecca. I'm William Anderson's daughter." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Rebecca? Carlos's daughter? My God. How did you get my number? I found your letters at the property. Jennifer, I really need to talk to you. Something has happened here." "William, he's already gone. 2 months ago. I'm so sorry. I know you were very close." Jennifer began to cry on the other end of the line. "I should have come back sooner. He asked me to wait, said he needed to sort some things out first, but I should have come back." "Jennifer, there are people trying to take the property. They say my father owed money, and they broke into my house looking for I don't know what. Listen carefully, Rebecca. Don't tell anyone about the discoveries you've made there. No one can know until I arrive. Can I come there this weekend? Please, yes. I need to understand what's happening. And be careful with a man named Richard Thompson. He is not who he says he is." Rebecca felt her blood run cold. How did Jennifer know about Richard? "You know him." "I know him all too well. He is part of a group that exploits archaeological sites illegally. They sell the pieces they find to private collectors and destroy important historical evidence. Your father had been trying to stop them for years. But he showed me documents saying my father owed him money. Fake documents for sure. That's how they operate. They forge debts to gain legal access to the properties. Once they get there, They dig everything up quickly and sell the historical pieces for huge sums. And what can I do? Resist. Don't sign anything. I'm on my way with documents that will prove the property's historical importance. If we can get official recognition, it will be protected by law. When Rebecca hung up the phone, she felt a mix of relief and worry. At least now she knew she wasn't alone, but she also understood the situation was much more serious than she had imagined. On Sunday, Jennifer arrived in Rockville. She was a woman of about 45, blonde, wearing glasses with the air of a university professor. When Rebecca saw her getting off the bus, she immediately recognized the face from the photographs she had found. "Rebecca?" asked Jennifer, approaching. "Jennifer, I'm so glad you came." The two women hugged as if they were old friends. Jennifer was visibly emotional to be back in town after so many years. "How is the house and the excavations that William was doing?" "Come and see. I think you'll be surprised." On the way to the property, Jennifer told her story. She was an archaeologist, a graduate of the State University of West Virginia, and had met William when she came to Rockville to research the old Hope settlement back in the 90s. "Back then, I was doing my master's on colonial settlements in West Virginia. I came here following a lead about Hope settlement, which had disappeared from maps in the 18th century. And did my father help with the research? More than that. He became fascinated by the subject. He discovered that his property was right on the main ruins of the settlement. We started excavating together, always very carefully and with thorough documentation. And did you find important things?" "Very important. Hope Settlement wasn't an ordinary village. It was a very prosperous mining and trade center, but mainly it was a place where different cultures coexisted: Portuguese, Africans, and indigenous peoples. The evidence we found showed a society much more complex and sophisticated than imagined. Why didn't you make it public?" "We tried. But we discovered there were people interested in exploiting the site commercially. We preferred to keep it secret until we could secure official protection. The problem is that takes years, and in that time the site remains vulnerable. When they arrived at the property, Jennifer was moved to see the house where she had spent so much time years before. Rebecca showed her everything she had discovered in the last few weeks. My God, Rebecca, you found much more than we expected? These coins, some are from the 17th century, and this pottery, it's very elaborate indigenous work. Is it worth a lot of money? For the history of the United States, it's worth much more than money. For private collectors, it's also worth a fortune. That's why we need to protect all of this." Jennifer explained that she had spent the last few months organizing documentation to get the property listed as a National Historical Heritage Site. "If we succeed, the property becomes protected by law. You remain the owner, but no one can do illegal excavations or construction that damages the archaeological site." "And does that solve my financial situation?" "In several ways. First, you become free from the false debt claims, because a listed historical heritage site cannot be seized for common financial matters. Second, you can develop controlled historical tourism, which generates income. And third, there are government support programs for guardians of historical heritage sites. It all sounded too good to be true. Rebecca wanted to believe it, but she was afraid of being disappointed. "How long does it take to get this listing?" "Normally years, but I have some contacts that might speed up the process, especially considering the importance of the discoveries and the imminent threat of destruction." Throughout the afternoon, Jennifer and Rebecca examined the archaeological discoveries. Jennifer photographed each piece, documented its exact location, and took detailed notes in a notebook. "Rebecca, this is sensational. We've found evidence that Hope Settlement had a very advanced water supply system for its time. And these coins, some are from the U.S. Mint Philadelphia 18th century. They are extremely rare." As the sun began to set, the two women were organizing all the material when they heard the sound of cars approaching. "Who could that be?" asked Rebecca. "Let's see, but be prepared for anything." 3 cars stopped in front of the property. Richard Thompson got out of the first one, accompanied by 5 other men Rebecca didn't know. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Rebecca. I see you have visitors." "Good afternoon, Richard. This is Jennifer, a family friend." "Jennifer? Richard made a look of recognition. The famous archaeologist. It's been a long time. Richard Thompson, said Jennifer coldly. Still trading in historical heritage? I see your friends don't have a high opinion of me, Mrs. Rebecca, but I'm here in an official capacity. I've brought a court order to survey the property. Richard showed some papers that really looked like official documents. According to this order, I have the right to conduct excavations to locate assets that secure the payment of the debt left by your father. These documents are fake, said Jennifer firmly. You have no authorization to dig for anything here. That's for the courts to decide, Doctor. For now, this order is valid. I want to see that order, demanded Jennifer. Jennifer examined the documents for a few minutes, clearly looking for irregularities. Richard, this order was issued based on debt documents that I am sure are forged, and even if they were real, you would not have authorization to excavate on private property without an archaeological impact study. Doctor, you are interfering in legal matters that are not within your competence. Actually, they are. I am the archaeologist responsible for the study of this site, registered with the National Historical Heritage Institute, and I have reason to believe this property houses an archaeological site of national importance. Richard's expression changed when he heard that. What kind of archaeological site? I cannot reveal that yet, as the studies are ongoing, but I can assure you that any unauthorized excavation here would constitute a crime against the national historical heritage. Do you have documents to prove this? Yes, I do, and they are duly filed with the competent authorities. Jennifer was bluffing, but she did it with such conviction that Richard seemed to believe her. He spoke quietly with the other men before addressing the two women again. Very well. We will wait for the situation to be regularized, but I want you to know I won't give up easily. This property has debts to be settled. After the men left, Rebecca broke down in tears of relief. I thought they were going to force us out. For now, we've managed to buy some time, but we need to act fast. Richard will find out we don't have official protection yet and he'll be back. What can we do? I'm going to Charlotte tomorrow and will expedite the landmark designation process as much as possible. Meanwhile, you need to document everything you've found and hide the most valuable pieces. Hide them where? We'll think of a safe place. The important thing is that Richard doesn't lay his hands on anything until we get legal protection. That night, Jennifer slept at the property. The two women spent hours talking about William, about the past and about plans for the future. Rebecca, I need to tell you the truth about me and your father, said Jennifer when the children were already asleep. Mrs. Dorothy mentioned that you were more than friends. We were in a relationship, very much in love. He wanted to marry me. Why didn't you get married? Because I was young and too ambitious. I wanted to finish my doctorate, build a career at the university. I thought staying in a small country town would limit my life. And he didn't want to go with you. He couldn't. He had to take care of the property, the family legacy, and I didn't understand at the time how important that was to him. I left thinking I was making the right choice. Did you ever see each other again? We met again a few years ago when I resumed my research on Hope Settlement. He had become an expert on the subject, knew more about the local history than any trained historian. But by then it was already too late for us. Why too late? He had married your mother, had you? He was a man of character. He would never leave his family. We became partners in protecting the archaeological site, but always maintaining a respectful distance. Did my mother know about you? I don't know. I hope not. Your mother was a wonderful woman and didn't deserve to suffer because of our past. Rebecca was moved by the story. She finally understood why her father was so reserved about the property and about his past in Rockville. Jennifer, why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that I will protect this property not just for its historical value, but also because it was Carlos's life's passion, and now it's your home. I won't let anyone take this away from the family. On Monday morning, Jennifer left for Charlotte, taking part of the documentation and photographs of the discoveries. She promised to return as soon as possible with news about the heritage listing. Rebecca was alone again, but now with a different feeling. She was no longer lost and scared. She had a purpose, to protect the legacy her father had left for her and her children. Over the following days, she continued exploring the property very carefully. Following Jennifer's guidance, she made detailed maps of each discovery and photographed everything before removing any object from its original location. The discoveries continued to surprise. In an area near the back of the house, she found what appeared to be the remains of an old church or chapel. The stones were arranged in a rectangular shape, with what remained of an altar at the front. "Mom, look at this," said Emily, pointing to one of the stones. On the stone, something was engraved, letters very worn by time but still legible. "Hope Settlement, 1687. 1687, murmured Rebecca. Over 300 years. At that moment, she truly understood the historical magnitude of what they were protecting. It wasn't just a piece of land with some old coins. It was a preserved piece of United States colonial history, but the tranquility didn't last long. On Wednesday morning, Richard Thompson returned, this time accompanied by a man who introduced himself as a court officer. "Mrs. Rebecca, I've brought Mr. Robert here, a court officer, to carry out the official inventory of the property as per the court order." "But Jennifer said you couldn't." "Dr. Jennifer does not have the legal authority to stop a court order. These excavations will happen with or without her approval." The court officer showed documents that indeed looked official. Rebecca didn't understand legal matters and didn't know how to contest them. "Can I at least call a lawyer?" "Of course. But the order will be carried out today. The inventory needs to be done." Rebecca called Jennifer, who was desperate upon hearing the situation. "Rebecca, they are acting very fast. I've secured some approvals here in Charlotte, but I don't have the official heritage listing document yet. What do I do?" "Buy time. Don't let them excavate the main areas. They say there are small children on the property and that it's dangerous to do excavations with children nearby. And if they don't agree, then document everything. Film it, take photos, write down everyone's name. If they destroy any important historical evidence, it can be used against them later." Rebecca went back to the men trying to buy time. "Gentlemen, may I ask that you only inventory the house and leave the backyard for another day? My children play out there and it could be dangerous." "Mrs. Rebecca, the warrant is for today." "But we can do this. The children stay inside the house while we examine the grounds." There was no more way to delay. Rebecca gathered her children inside the house and watched from the window as the men began to examine the backyard. To her surprise, they seemed to know exactly where to look. They went straight to the areas where she had found the most important pieces. How do they know where to dig? She asked herself. When the men started to find the archaeological pieces, Rebecca came out of the house. "What are you doing? These pieces have historical value." "We are inventorying the assets, as per the warrant," Richard replied coldly. "But these coins and ceramics are historical heritage. You can't just take them from here." "Mrs. Rebecca, we will take everything for appraisal. After the debt is settled, whatever is left comes back to you." Rebecca realized she was witnessing the organized theft of priceless historical heritage, but she felt completely powerless to stop it. That's when she had an idea. She ran inside the house and started recording everything with the cell phone Jennifer had lent her. "What are you doing, Ma'am?" asked one of the men. "Documenting the inventory, I have that right." Richard was clearly bothered by this, but he couldn't stop her without revealing his true intentions. For the next 2 hours, Rebecca recorded everything she could. The men removed dozens of archaeological pieces, several old coins, and even some of the engraved stones she had discovered. "You are destroying an archaeological site," she shouted when she saw them removing the stones from the old chapel. "Calm down, Mrs. Rebecca. It's just for appraisal," Richard lied. When the men left, taking at least half of everything that had been discovered, Rebecca broke down in tears. She felt she had failed her father's memory and the trust Jennifer had placed in her. But when she looked at the recordings she had made on the phone, she realized she had documented important evidence of what was happening. She immediately called Jennifer. "Jennifer, they took almost everything." "Rebecca, I'm already on my way there. I got a court injunction that prohibits any excavation on the property until the archaeological studies are completed. But it's too late. They already took the pieces. It doesn't matter. What you recorded can be used to charge them with a crime against historical heritage. They incriminated themselves. How so? If we can prove that warrant was fake and that they knew they were removing historical heritage from an archaeological site, they can be arrested. And is it possible to prove that? With your recordings, yes, you documented them removing historical pieces, knowing what they were. That's a federal crime. Jennifer arrived in Rockville the next morning, accompanied by a lawyer specializing in historical heritage and 2 representatives from the National Historical Heritage Institute. Rebecca, let me introduce Dr. Michael, our lawyer, and the archaeologists Rachel and David from the NHHI. The experts examined what remained of the archaeological site and were impressed by the importance of the discoveries. Mrs. Rebecca, even with the irregular removal of several pieces, we still have enough evidence to prove this is an archaeological site of national importance, said David. What does this mean in practice? It means your property will be officially protected as a historical heritage site and that the people who removed the artifacts committed a federal crime. And my financial situation? Well, there we have good and bad news, said Dr. Michael. The bad news is that the process to recover the stolen artifacts may take a while. The good news is we discovered that the debt documents presented by Richard Thompson are indeed fake. How did you find out? We investigated the origin of the documents. They were made with paper and ink that don't match the period when they were supposedly signed. Also, your father's signature was clearly forged. And now? Now we go to court. With the recordings you made and the expert analysis proving the forgery, we have a very strong case against Richard and his group. Over the following days, the situation took turns Rebecca never imagined. The recordings she had made became evidence in a criminal case. Richard Thompson and his accomplices were arrested, charged with document forgery, fraud, and crimes against the national historical heritage. The story made headlines in the regional and national press. Journalists came to Rockville to tell the story of the widow who saved an archaeological site from criminal exploiters. Mrs. Rebecca, how do you feel being called a national heroine? Asked a television reporter. I don't feel like a heroine, I just did what I thought was right. My father dedicated years to protecting this place, and I couldn't let it be destroyed. And plans for the future? We want to turn the property into a historical visitation center where people can learn about Hope Settlement and the importance of preserving our heritage. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. With the official recognition of the archaeological site, Rebecca's life changed completely. The government created a support program so she could restore the house and develop historical tourism on the property. Jennifer, how does this program work? Asked Rebecca. It's simple. You remain the owner of the property, but you receive financial and technical support to conserve the archaeological site and develop educational visitation. It's a guaranteed income and a way to contribute to the country's historical education. And the children? Will they be able to study here? Even better, the government is creating a model heritage education school here in Rockville. Your children will be the first students. 6 months later, the property had been transformed. The house was restored, keeping its original features, but now with all the necessary infrastructure. The backyard became an official archaeological site with educational trails and protected excavation areas. Mum, come see how many visitors arrived today, shouted Emily excitedly. Every weekend, groups of students and tourists interested in history visited the property. Rebecca had become a guide specialized in the history of Hope Settlement. Welcome to the former Hope Settlement, she would say to each group. Here you will learn the history of a colonial settlement that mysteriously disappeared and was rediscovered by chance by a family that needed a fresh start. Mrs. Rebecca, is it true that you almost lost all this to some bandits? Asked a student. It's true. But I learned that sometimes what seems like the end can actually be a new beginning. When I thought I had lost everything, I was actually about to find something much bigger than I imagined. Daniel, now 14, had become a young amateur archaeologist, helping with supervised excavations and explaining the discoveries to the younger visitors. This pottery fragment you're looking at was made by indigenous artisans over 300 years ago, he explained to a group of children from the town. My mother found this while digging in our backyard. Emily and Nathan were also participating in the educational activities, each with their specific roles according to their age. Jennifer had moved permanently to Rockville and taken over the scientific coordination of the project. She and Rebecca had developed a deep friendship based on mutual respect and a shared passion for historical preservation. You know, Rebecca, I think your father would be very proud to see what you've built here, said Jennifer one afternoon as they watched a group of archaeologists working in a new excavation area. I hope so. Sometimes I feel like he planned all of this. How so? He could have told me about the archaeological site before he passed. He could have resolved the legal situation while he was still alive. But he let me discover everything on my own. Why do you think he did that? I think he wanted me to find my own path. If he had told me everything, I never would have developed the passion for history that I have today. I never would have truly become a part of this place. That's an interesting way of looking at things. Besides, if he had made the site public earlier, maybe Richard Thompson would have managed to legally take control of everything. The way it happened, we were able to protect everything and still expose their crimes. 1 year after the first discoveries, the property had become one of the main tourist attractions in the region. But more important than that, it had become a model for how local communities can benefit from the preservation of historical heritage. Mrs. Rebecca, we've received an invitation to present our project at an international archaeology conference in Washington, D.C., said Jennifer, showing an official document. International, but I don't speak English. Don't worry. They want to learn about our experience with community-based historical heritage management. You'll speak in Portuguese about how an ordinary family became the guardian of a national treasure. Me? Speak at a conference? You are the most qualified person to tell this story. You're the one who lived through it all. The conference in Washington, D.C. was a milestone in Rebecca's life. For the first time, she saw herself being recognized not just as a beneficiary of public policies, but as a heritage management specialist. Mrs. Rebecca Anderson, announced the conference coordinator, one of the most important guardians of historical heritage in the United States, responsible for the discovery and preservation of the Hope Settlement archaeological site. During her presentation, Rebecca told the whole story, from the initial despair of a widow with no money to the discovery that changed her life and the life of an entire community. I learned that historical heritage isn't just about the past, she said to an audience of archaeologists and historians from various countries. It's about building the future. It's about giving our children a sense of belonging and purpose. The lecture had a great impact. Several universities invited Rebecca to share her experience, and the model developed in Rockville began to be replicated in other regions of the country. 2 years after the discovery, the town of Rockville had been transformed. Historical tourism brought economic development to the entire region. New hotels, restaurants, and craft shops emerged to serve the visitors. Mum, did you know the town has tripled its population since we started the project? Said Daniel, now 15, and already decided on his future profession, archaeologist. Really? Yes. The geography teacher said Rockville is now one of the main historical tourism destinations in West Virginia. And you, Daniel, how does it feel to be the son of the heroine of Rockville? Proud. But mostly proud to have a mother who never gave up, even when everything seemed lost. Emily, now 10 years old, had developed a special talent for explaining history to children. She led educational tours for groups of students her age, using simple and fun language. Kids, do you know what an archaeologist is? She would ask each new group. It's someone who looks for dinosaurs, some child would always answer. Not exactly. Archaeologists are like detectives who investigate how people lived in the past. And here in our house, we discovered how people lived 300 years ago. Nathan, the youngest, had found his calling as a storyteller. He invented adventures based on the archaeological discoveries and told them to the younger visitors, always with lots of drama and emotion. And then the captain of Hope Settlement hid the treasure very, very deep in the ground to protect it from the evil pirates, he narrated, gesturing animatedly. Nathan, they weren't pirates, Emily corrected. They were explorers. To me, an evil explorer is the same thing as an evil pirate. The two children laughed, and the adults were enchanted by the historical knowledge they had developed so naturally. Jennifer, now permanently settled in Rockville, had become much more than a collaborator on the project. She was practically part of the family. "Rebecca, there's some news that might interest you," she said one morning, showing an official letter. "What is it?" "Richard Thompson and his accomplices have been convicted. Besides prison, they'll have to pay compensation for the damage to the historical heritage." "What kind of compensation?" "A significant sum that will be allocated to expanding the project here on the property. We'll be able to build a small museum and expand the educational activities." "And the items they took? They were all recovered. In fact, the investigation discovered they had a much larger scheme. There were archaeological artifacts stolen from various regions of the country. Everything will be returned to their places of origin." "Does that mean we'll get our coins and ceramics back?" "All of them, and more. Some of the items they had from other places will be loaned to our future museum because this place has become a national reference in conservation." The news of the conviction brought a sense of justice served, but also of renewed responsibility. Rebecca knew that now the project had to keep growing and improving. 3 years after the initial discovery, the property had officially become the Hope Settlement Historical Preservation Center. The small museum had been built next to the original house and also functioned as an archaeological research center. "Mrs. Rebecca, we have an interesting proposal to present," said Dr. Michael, the lawyer who had helped with the initial case. "What kind of proposal?" "A publisher wants to publish a book telling your story. They think it would be important to inspire other people who are in difficult situations." "A book about me?" "Not exactly about you, about the importance of not giving up, about how sometimes solutions are closer than we imagine, and about how an ordinary person can make a difference in preserving the country's history." "I don't know how to write books." "They would hire a professional writer to help. You would just tell your story and he would organize everything." The idea of the book initially made Rebecca uncomfortable. She didn't like being the center of attention and thought her story was nothing extraordinary. "Jennifer, what do you think about this book idea?" "I think you should accept, not because your story is extraordinary, but precisely because it's ordinary. It shows that ordinary people, facing ordinary problems, can discover extraordinary things." "But I didn't do anything heroic. I just tried to survive." "And it was precisely by trying to survive that you saved a national historical heritage. Isn't that heroic?" "When you put it that way, Rebecca, how many people do you think are going through difficulties similar to what you went through? How many might be sitting on solutions they don't even imagine exist?" "Many, I suppose. So your story can inspire those people not to give up, to explore the possibilities they have at hand." Convinced by Jennifer's arguments, Rebecca agreed to participate in the book project. For months, she worked with a writer specializing in biographies, recounting every detail of her journey. The process of telling her story to the writer was therapeutic for Rebecca. For the first time, she was able to mentally organize everything that had happened and truly understand how her life had changed. "Do you know what the hardest moment was?" she said during one of the interviews for the book. "Which one?" "When I saw those men taking the archaeological pieces and felt completely powerless. At that moment, I thought I had failed my father, my children, and the history of the place." "And when was the moment you realized things were going to work out?" "When Jennifer came back with the court injunction. That's when I understood I was no longer alone, that there were people willing to fight for what was right." "And today, how do you view this whole experience?" "As a lesson about trust. Not blind trust, but trust that when we do what we believe is right, even without knowing if it will work out, things tend to organize themselves in a positive way." The book was launched a year later with the title The Buried Treasure: How a Widow Saved the History of the United States. It became an editorial success, especially among people going through economic and personal difficulties. Rebecca was invited to book signings in several cities, always accompanied by her children, who had become an integral part of the story. Mrs. Rebecca, what advice would you give to someone going through difficulties like the ones you went through? Asked a reader during a signing in Charlotte. Not to give up exploring the possibilities you have at hand. Sometimes the solution is closer than we imagine, and to seek help. There's nothing wrong with asking for support when we need it. Did you always know there was something special on your father's property? Never. If I had known, I probably would have acted differently, and maybe wouldn't have discovered what truly mattered. What truly mattered? That some inheritances are much greater than material inheritances. My father left me much more than an old house and a weed-filled plot of land. He left me a life purpose. 4 years after the first discoveries, the Hope Settlement Historical Preservation Center had become an international reference. Researchers from universities in several countries came to study the community-based heritage management model developed there. "Mom, a letter arrived from UNESCO," said Daniel, now 17 and about to start his archaeology degree. UNESCO? It's the United Nations Organization for Education and Culture. They want to include our project in a list of international best practices. What does that mean? That our experience will serve as an example for other countries that want to develop similar projects. Rebecca still had trouble believing the scale her story had taken. From the despair of a widow without money to pay rent, it had transformed into a globally recognized experience. But what made her proudest wasn't the international recognition. It was seeing how her children had grown with a solid sense of purpose and identity. Emily, now 12 years old, had become a young amateur historian, able to tell the history of Hope Settlement with impressive detail for her age. "Mom, did you know our town is now in the high school history books?" she said excitedly. "How so?" The history teacher showed the new book the government released. It has a whole chapter on historical heritage preservation that uses our story as an example. "Really?" "Yes. And there's a photo of us in the garden, remember? The one the photographer took the first year. Nathan, now 10 years old, had developed a passion for storytelling that went far beyond the archaeological discoveries. He invented adventures based on the real history of Hope Settlement, always adding fun elements that made the visiting children interested in history. And then the indigenous Princess Willow planted the magic seed that grew and turned into the tree you can see over there," he told a group of kindergarten children. "Nathan, there was no indigenous princess named Willow in Hope Settlement," corrected Emily. "But there could have been, and the kids liked the story better with the princess." "He's right," said Rebecca, smiling. "The stories become more interesting when they have a little magic." Jennifer had married a history professor from the State University who had come to study the project and decided to stay in town. They lived in a house near the property and actively collaborated in all activities. "Rebecca, I have some important news to share," said Jennifer one afternoon. "What news?" "I'm pregnant." Rebecca was moved by the news. Jennifer, at 48, would finally realize her dream of becoming a mother. "What joy, Jennifer. Finally, you'll have your own family." "Actually, I think I've had a family for a long time. You are my family in my heart, and you always will be. But now you'll have your own baby to teach about Hope Settlement." "I hope so. I want my child to grow up knowing the importance of preserving history and never giving up on dreams." The birth of Jennifer's son, named William in honor of Rebecca's father, was celebrated by the entire community. The baby became another member of the large family that had formed around the preservation project. 5 years after the initial discoveries, Rebecca looked back and could hardly believe the transformation her life had taken. From a desperate widow with no resources, she had become a recognized expert in historical heritage management, but more important than professional recognition was the stability and purpose she had found for herself and her children. "Kids, do you remember what our life was like before we came here?" she asked one night as they dined in the restored kitchen of the house that was now a real home. "I remember we had almost nothing," said Daniel. "But today, I see we already had the most important thing." "What was the most important thing?" "We had each other, and you never let us give up, even when everything seemed impossible." "I remember I cried a lot," said Emily. "I didn't want to come to this ugly house. And now? Now I can't imagine living anywhere else. This is our real home." "And I remember the buried treasure," said Nathan excitedly. When we found the first coins, it was like finding a pirate treasure. Actually, you were right, said Rebecca. We really did find a treasure, but I discovered the real treasure wasn't the coins or the old pieces. What was it then? It was the chance to start over, to build something meaningful, to be part of our country's history. And to help other people too, added Emily. How many families have come here to learn about the project? Many. And each of them takes a bit of our experience to try to build something similar in their region. That night, after the children went to sleep, Rebecca went out to the backyard and looked at the spot where she had made the first discoveries. 5 years later, that area had become a preserved archaeological garden, with educational trails and explanatory signs. She remembered the morning when she had started digging there, just trying to find a place to plant a small vegetable garden. At that moment, she was desperate, without money and without prospects. Now, looking at everything that had been built, she realized that sometimes the greatest treasures are literally buried in our own backyards. Not material treasures, but possibilities we never imagined existed. "Thank you, Father," she murmured, looking at the stars. "Thank you for letting me discover everything on my own. If you had told me about the archaeological site, I would never have developed the strength needed to protect it." A gentle breeze swayed the fruit trees, now carefully preserved as part of the historical heritage. In the silence of the night, Rebecca could almost hear the echoes of the old Hope settlement, which had risen from the ashes thanks to the desperation and determination of a widow who refused to give up. 6 years later, the project had expanded to a much larger area. The city of Rockville had acquired adjacent land to expand the Historical Preservation Center, which now included a modern museum, a specialized library, and even a small amphitheater where plays about local history were performed. "Mom, did you see the number of visitors last month?" asked Daniel, now a university student but still helping with activities during vacations. "How many were there?" "Almost 5,000 people, among students, researchers, and tourists. 5,000. When we started, we were happy when 5 visitors came on a weekend. And look, people came from 12 different countries. There are people from Mexico, Argentina, even from South Africa, wanting to learn about our model." The internationalization of the project had brought new challenges and opportunities. Rebecca had learned basic English to communicate with foreign visitors, and Emily had become fluent in Spanish to assist Latin American visitors. Nathan, now 11 years old, had discovered a special talent for drawing and created illustrations of the archaeological discoveries that were used in the museum's educational materials. "Mom, I finished the drawing of the indigenous pottery you asked for," he said, showing a detailed illustration of one of the fragments found. "It's perfect, Nathan. You have a real talent for this. When I grow up, I want to be an archaeologist like Daniel, but one who draws the discoveries instead of digging. That's called scientific illustration. It's a very important profession. Then I'm going to be a scientific illustrator of ancient things." The expansion of the project had also attracted the attention of investors and companies interested in supporting cultural preservation initiatives. Ironically, a large mining company had become one of the main sponsors of the center, as a way to compensate for the environmental impacts of its activities in other regions. "Rebecca, we have an interesting proposal," said Jennifer, entering the house with a folder full of documents. "What kind of proposal?" "The sponsoring company wants to create a national program for identifying and protecting archaeological sites in rural areas, based on our model." "And what does that mean for us?" "That you would be the national coordinator of the program. You would travel across the country, helping other communities develop similar projects." "National coordinator? But I don't have the formal training for that. You have something much more valuable, practical experience. You know what it's like to fight to preserve historical heritage from scratch." The proposal left Rebecca divided. On one hand, it was an incredible opportunity to expand the impact of her work. On the other, it would mean spending a lot of time away from home and her children. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But remember, your children are already grown and on their own paths. Daniel will graduate as an archaeologist in 2 years. Emily is excelling as a young historian. And Nathan already knows he wants to work in scientific illustration." "That's true. They really don't need me like they used to." "Actually, they might need you in a different way. as an example that it's always possible to grow and accept new challenges. After a week of reflection, Rebecca decided to accept the proposal. She would be the national coordinator of the Rural Archaeological Sites Identification and Protection Program, keeping her base in Rockville, but traveling across the country to implement similar projects. "Kids, I need to talk to you about an important decision," she said one Sunday evening. She explained the proposal and asked for each one's opinion. "Mum, you have to accept," Daniel said immediately. "It's the chance to help so many more people." "But I'll be traveling a lot. Will you miss me?" "Of course we will," said Emily, "but we'll also be proud. You'll teach other families to discover treasures like we did. And when you come back from your trips, you'll have new stories to tell," added Nathan. "I'll get to draw discoveries from other places too." With her children's support, Rebecca began her new career as national coordinator. In the first 2 years, she visited over 100 rural properties in 15 states, helping to identify and protect archaeological sites that were under threat. Each case was unique, but they all had elements in common. Rural landowners facing financial difficulties, casual archaeological discoveries, and the need to protect historical heritage from criminal exploiters. "Mrs. Rebecca, our situation is just like what you went through," said a farmer in rural Alabama. "We found some ancient indigenous artifacts on the land, and people showed up offering money to buy them. And you suspect they aren't trustworthy people. We don't understand these legal things, but they want us to sign papers without even letting us read them properly." "Don't sign anything," Rebecca said firmly. "I'll call a team of archaeologists to evaluate the discoveries. If it really is an important archaeological site, you could have a much more stable and lasting source of income through historical tourism." In every region she visited, Rebecca left behind not only a structure for heritage protection, but also a network of people trained to identify and protect future discoveries. The program was so successful that after 3 years it had already identified and protected more than 50 important archaeological sites across the country. Several of them became historical tourism centers that transformed the economies of small, rural communities. "Rebecca, have you seen the program's statistics?" asked Jennifer during one of Rebecca's visits to Rockville. "What statistics?" "Over 200 rural families have directly benefited from the projects, and archaeological sites representing over 1,000 years of American history have been preserved. It's impressive. Sometimes I still can't believe all this started with a desperate widow digging up a backyard." "Believe it. And most importantly, you've proven that historical heritage preservation and economic development can go hand in hand." "How so?" "All the communities served by the program have improved their economic situation. No one became poorer by protecting historical heritage. Quite the opposite." 9 years into her journey, Rebecca had become one of the leading American specialists in community-based historical heritage management. She had written 3 books, participated in international conferences, and received several awards for her work. But what made her most proud was seeing how her children had developed. Daniel had become an archaeologist and was pursuing a master's degree on non-invasive archaeological prospecting techniques. His undergraduate thesis was about the discoveries on the family property, analyzed with modern scientific methods. Emily, at 16, was already a recognized young historian, with articles published in specialized journals on local history. She had created a heritage education project for rural schools that was being replicated in several regions. Nathan, at 15, had become a self-taught scientific illustrator with drawings of archaeological discoveries displayed in museums in various cities. His work was used in textbooks on American archaeology. "Mum, you know what I discovered," said Emily during one of Rebecca's visits home. "What, sweetie?" "That our family didn't just preserve the history of Hope Settlement. We became part of it." "How so?" 100 years from now, when researchers study the history of Rockville in the 21st century, our story will be in the books. We've become history too." "That's true, but I hope it's remembered as a story of perseverance and hard work, not as something extraordinary." "But to me it is extraordinary," said Nathan. "How many mothers could turn an old house and a backyard full of weeds into one of the main tourist attractions in West Virginia? And how many could create a national program that has already helped hundreds of families?" added Daniel. "You're exaggerating. I just did what any mother would do. I tried to give the best to my children." "And you succeeded," said Emily. "You gave us much more than a home. You gave us a life purpose." 10 years after the first discoveries, Rebecca decided it was time to reduce her travels and dedicate herself more to consolidating the original project in Rockville. The national program was running well with regional coordinators, and she wanted to spend more time with her family. The Hope Settlement Historical Preservation Center had become one of the country's leading archaeological research centers. Researchers from American and foreign universities came regularly to study the discoveries and the preservation methods developed there. "Rebecca, we have a proposal to make," said the Dean of the State University of West Virginia during an official visit to the center. "What kind of proposal?" "We want to create an advanced campus of the university here, specializing in archaeology and heritage preservation. You would be the academic coordinator." "But I don't have a university degree." "You have something much more valuable, unique practical knowledge. And we can regularize your academic status through an honorary doctorate." "Honorary doctorate?" It's a title awarded to people who have made exceptional contributions to a field of knowledge, even without traditional academic training. The proposal was tempting, but Rebecca wanted to consult her family before making any decision. "What do you all think?" she asked her children and Jennifer. "I think you deserve it," said Daniel. "No one in the United States knows more about community-based historical heritage management than you." "And it would be great to have a university here in Rockville," added Emily. "I could get my undergraduate degree in history without having to leave town." "And I could officially study scientific illustration," said Nathan excitedly. "Jennifer, what do you think?" "I think it's recognition for everything you've built, and it would be a way to ensure the knowledge you've developed isn't lost." Convinced by her family's arguments, Rebecca accepted the proposal. At 42, she would become an honorary doctorate in archaeology and coordinator of the Advanced Campus of Archaeology and Heritage at the State University. The title conferment ceremony was held at the Preservation Center itself, in a celebration that brought together academic authorities, government representatives, and hundreds of people who had benefited from the projects developed by Rebecca. "Dr. Rebecca Anderson," said the university president during the ceremony, "you have proven that the most valuable knowledge doesn't come only from books, but from the practical experience of those who face real challenges and find innovative solutions." "Thank you," replied Rebecca, visibly moved. "But I want to make it clear that everything I managed to build was with the help of many people, especially my children, who never stopped believing it was possible to turn difficulties into opportunities. And what message would you leave for other people facing difficulties similar to those you faced? That they never stop exploring the possibilities they have at their disposal. That sometimes the solutions are closer than we imagine, and most importantly, that they ask for help when they need it. Nobody builds anything alone." After the ceremony, a journalist asked Rebecca what had been the most memorable moment of her entire journey. "It was when I understood I was no longer fighting just to survive, but to build something that would last long beyond me," she replied. "When was that?" "When I saw my oldest son explaining to a group of visitors the historical importance of the discoveries, using technical terms he had learned on his own, out of pure passion for the subject. That's when I realized I had managed to pass on something much greater than knowledge. I had passed on a love for preserving history." "And today, how do you see the future?" "With great hope, not just for what we've already built, but for knowing we have formed a new generation of young people passionate about historical preservation. They will build things much greater than I ever imagined." 15 years after the first discovery in the backyard, Rebecca looked at her life with a deep sense of gratitude and fulfillment. From a desperate widow with no financial resources, she had become one of the country's leading authorities in her field. But more important than any professional recognition was seeing how the entire experience had shaped her children into responsible young adults committed to important causes. Daniel, now a PhD in archaeology, was running one of the country's leading archaeological materials analysis laboratories. His research on non-destructive analysis techniques was revolutionizing how archaeologists studied historical artifacts. Emily had become one of the country's youngest history teachers, specializing in heritage education. Her teaching methods were studied by educators from various universities. Nathan had become an internationally recognized scientific illustrator, with works displayed in natural history museums in several countries. His drawings of United States archaeological discoveries were helping to publicize the country's historical richness abroad. "Kids, do you remember that first night we slept on the floor of this house?" Rebecca asked during a Sunday family gathering. "I remember," said Daniel. "I was angry at you for bringing us to this place." "And I cried thinking we were going to starve," added Emily. "And I didn't understand why we couldn't go back home," said Nathan. "And now?" "Now I understand that night was the beginning of our true story," said Daniel. "If we hadn't come here, if you hadn't had the courage to start over from scratch, none of this would have happened." "Sometimes the scariest changes are the ones we need the most," said Emily. "You taught us that," laughed Nathan. "And you also taught us that it's always worth digging deeper when we find something interesting, literally and metaphorically." Jennifer, now with 6-year-old William, participated in the conversation as a full-fledged family member. "Rebecca, do you know what the most impressive thing about this whole story is?" she said. "What?" "How you managed to turn despair into hope, not just for your family, but for hundreds of other families across the country." "I didn't do it alone. I had help from many people, starting with you." "You had the courage to accept help. That's very different. Many people prefer to suffer alone rather than ask for support." "That's true. I learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of intelligence." That Sunday afternoon, while observing the typical weekend activity at the Preservation Center, families visiting the museum, students participating in educational workshops, researchers working in the excavation areas, Rebecca reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a problematic inheritance. What seemed to be the end of all possibilities had become the beginning of a completely new and far more meaningful life than she had ever imagined possible. "Thank you, Dad," she murmured again, as had become her habit whenever she felt especially grateful. "Thank you for letting me discover on my own that sometimes the greatest treasures are buried right beneath our feet, waiting only for us to have the courage to start digging." A new family of visitors was arriving just then to see the center. Rebecca approached to welcome them, as she always did when she was present. "Welcome to the Hope Settlement Historical Preservation Center," she said with the warm smile that had become her trademark. "My name is Rebecca, and I'm pleased to tell you the story of how an ordinary family discovered they were sitting on one of the most important archaeological sites in the United States." "Is it true that you discovered all this by accident?" asked one of the visiting children. "Well, I'd say it was out of necessity. Sometimes when we're facing difficulties, we discover strengths and possibilities we didn't even know existed. That's what happened to us." "And did you get rich?" "We did, but not rich with money. We got rich with purpose, with knowledge, and with the opportunity to help other people, which are much more lasting kinds of wealth." As she led the group along the first educational trail, Rebecca thought about how her answer to that child perfectly summarized everything she had learned in 15 years of constant discovery. The real treasure had never been the ancient coins or the valuable archaeological pieces. The real treasure had been the opportunity to rebuild a life with meaning, to create a lasting legacy, and to raise a new generation committed to preserving history. And all of it had begun with a desperate widow who refused to give up, even when everything seemed lost. 20 years after the first discoveries, the Hope Settlement Historical Preservation Center had become a global model for community-based heritage management. Delegations from over 50 countries had visited the site to study and replicate the experience. Rebecca, now 52, was internationally recognized as one of the world's leading authorities on community-based historical heritage management. She had been invited to speak at the UN about sustainable development based on cultural preservation, but she continued to live in the same house where it had all begun, now fully restored but maintaining its original features. "Mom, an invitation arrived that might interest you," said Emily, now a doctor of history and the center's heritage education coordinator. "What kind of invitation?" "To be a consultant for a UN project that will implement historical preservation centers in developing countries in Africa and Asia." "How long of a commitment would it be?" 3 years, but based here in the United States. You would only travel to implement the initial projects and train the local teams. Rebecca was uncertain. At 52, she felt she had already contributed enough and wanted to spend more time with her family, especially with her grandchildren. Daniel had married and had 2 young children. May I think about it? Of course. But remember, it would be a chance to take our experience to places where it could make an even greater difference. How so? In countries where the preservation of historical heritage can be the difference between the preservation of ancestral cultures and their definitive disappearance. That argument deeply touched Rebecca. She knew from her own experience how heritage preservation could transform entire communities. After a few weeks of reflection, she decided to accept the challenge. It would be her final contribution to the field of historical preservation before retiring for good. During the following 3 years, Rebecca traveled to countries like Honduras, Ghana, Cambodia, and Nepal, implementing projects similar to the one she had created in Rockville. Each experience brought unique learnings and confirmed her conviction that historical preservation and community development were inseparable. "Dr. Rebecca," said a young Cambodian archaeologist during one of her missions, "how do you manage to convince rural communities that it's worth preserving historical heritage?" "I never try to convince anyone," she replied. "I only help people discover for themselves the value of what they have. When someone understands they are protecting the history of their own ancestors and creating opportunities for their children, the motivation arises naturally." But how do you do that? By showing that historical preservation isn't about the past, it's about building the future. It's about giving the next generations a sense of identity and belonging that no material wealth can provide. At the 25-year mark from the first discoveries, Rebecca finally retired from international consulting activities. She returned permanently to Rockville, now a prosperous town of 50,000 inhabitants that had become one of the main historical cultural tourism destinations in the United States. The Hope Settlement. Historical Preservation Center had expanded to include a full university campus with undergraduate and graduate courses in archaeology, history, heritage management, and cultural tourism. Her 3 children now managed different aspects of the project. Daniel was the dean of the university campus, Emily coordinated the educational programs, and Nathan directed the Center for Communication and Scientific Outreach. "Children," Rebecca said at a special family meeting, "the time has come to officially pass the coordination of everything to you." "Are you sure?" asked Daniel. "There's still so much you can contribute." "I'm sure. You have already surpassed everything I built. It's time to make space for you to create even greater things." "And what will you do?" asked Emily. "I'll do what I've always wanted. Just be the proud grandmother who tells her grandchildren stories about what life was like in the old days." "Will you keep living in the house?" asked Nathan. "Of course. This house is my home, but now without administrative responsibilities, just enjoying life and receiving visits from old friends." At the official coordination transfer ceremony held in the center's museum, Rebecca gave a speech that summarized her entire journey. "Dear friends, when I arrived at this property 25 years ago, I was desperate and without hope. I was a widow with no resources trying to find a place to raise my 3 young children. I never imagined that ruined house and that yard full of weeds would turn into what we see today, an international center of excellence that has already impacted the lives of thousands of people in dozens of countries. But I learned that the greatest treasures are rarely where we expect to find them. Sometimes they're buried right beneath our feet, waiting only for us to have the courage to start digging. I leave this project in the hands of my children, certain that they will build even greater and more important things, and I leave you all with a message: never stop exploring the possibilities you have at your disposal. Sometimes, what seems like the end is just the beginning of a much larger story." After the ceremony, a journalist asked Rebecca what advice she would give to someone facing difficulties similar to those she faced at the beginning. "To accept that sometimes we need to lose everything to discover what truly matters," she replied, "and to never be afraid to ask for help. The greatest treasures are discovered as a team, never alone. Do you regret anything? Only that it took me so long to understand that the most valuable inheritance my father left me wasn't the property, but the example of how to protect what is important even when it seems impossible. And what makes you most proud in this entire journey? Seeing my children become people who contribute to making the world better, and knowing that hundreds of other families have managed to turn their difficulties into opportunities using the methods we developed here. In the years following her retirement, Rebecca dedicated herself to writing her complete memoirs and organizing a historical archive of the project for future generations. She also began receiving, at her home, students and researchers interested in learning about heritage management. At 60 years old, still active and healthy, Rebecca received visitors almost daily. Her home had become a pilgrimage point for people interested in historical preservation and community development. "Mrs. Rebecca," asked a young archaeology student during one of these visits, "what was the secret to the success of everything you built?" "There was no secret," Rebecca replied, smiling. "Just persistence and a willingness to learn. And above all, never forgetting that the ultimate goal of any historical preservation project is to serve people, not to serve the heritage." How so? Historical heritage only has value if it improves people's lives, if it creates opportunities, if it generates knowledge, if it gives a sense of identity and belonging. If it doesn't do that, it's just a pile of old rocks. And what is the most important thing you learned on this entire journey? That sometimes God, the universe, or fate, whatever you prefer to call it, puts us in situations that seem impossible precisely so we can discover strengths we didn't even know we had. Do you believe it was all fate? I believe it was all a consequence of choices. I could have given up when I encountered the first difficulty. I could have sold the property to the first interested party. I could have ignored the archaeological discoveries. Every decision I made opened new possibilities. So the advice is to always choose the hardest path? No. The advice is to always choose the path that seems right, even when it's hard. There's an important difference between the two. At 65, Rebecca saw the birth of her fifth grandchild. The house she had inherited in ruins was now always full of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, playing in the same yard where she had made the discoveries that changed her life. "Grandma Rebecca, tell the story of the buried treasure again," her 8-year-old grandson would ask. "Which one?" she would ask, smiling. "The story of ancient coins, the story of engraved stones, or the story of how a lost family found its place in the world. Tell them all." And Rebecca would tell them, always adding new details that came to memory, always emphasizing the most important lessons, that it's worth fighting for what is right, that one should never give up when things get tough, and that the greatest treasures are always discovered when we least expect them. At 70 years old, Rebecca still lived in the same house, now surrounded by a university complex and a historical center that attracted visitors from all over the world. But to her it remained simply the home where she had raised her children and discovered her life's purpose. One Sunday afternoon, as she watched her grandchildren play in the backyard, Jennifer approached for a conversation. "Rebecca, do you remember when you thought your life was over?" "I do. It feels like an eternity." "And now?" "Now I understand that my life had only just begun. At 40, I was still too young to understand what truly matters." "And what truly matters?" "Building something that lasts beyond us, shaping people who will continue to build important things, and never ever giving up on believing that it's always possible to start over." "Do you have any regrets?" "None. Every difficulty I faced was necessary to transform me into the person I needed to be to build all this. And if you could give one piece of advice to the 40-year-old Rebecca, desperate and with no money, I would say, courage, Rebecca. You can't imagine it yet, but you are about to discover the true purpose of your life, and it will be much greater and more beautiful than anything you've ever dreamed of." That night, Rebecca wrote in her diary, a habit she had developed after retirement. "Today marks 30 years living in this house that I inherited, thinking it would be my temporary salvation. I discovered it was much more. It was my destiny. If someone had told me on that first morning when I started digging in the backyard that this simple action would trigger a journey that would transform not only my life, but the lives of thousands of people, I would never have believed it. But I learned that life has a wisdom that surpasses our understanding. Sometimes it places in our hands exactly what we need to become who we are meant to be, even when we can't see it at the time. The true treasure I found buried in the backyard was not the coins or the archaeological pieces. It was the discovery that it's always possible to start over, that it's never too late to find a new purpose, and that the greatest legacies are built step by step, day after day, with persistence and love. Today, at 70, I look back and see a life full of meaning. But mainly I look ahead and see that the best is yet to come, seeing my children and grandchildren continue to build important things, using as a foundation everything we learned together about the importance of never giving up on our dreams. End of story. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this incredible journey of Rebecca? Do you believe she made the right decisions? Have you ever been through a situation where you thought all was lost, but discovered new possibilities? Share with us your opinion on this story of overcoming and discovery. And if this narrative touched your heart in any way, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories we have prepared with great care for you.